All right, hello once again. This is Jeff Scott coming at you. We have been talking HTML5 and CSS3, but in section 3 of our textbook, Muroc's HTML5 and CSS3 3rd edition, the focus changes a little bit. The name of the section is JavaScript and jQuery for the non-programmer. So in Chapter 15, we learn how to add JavaScript and jQuery features and functionality to web pages. In Chapter 16, we go over the jQuery UI, which stands for user interface, and some of the jQuery plugins to add features like accordions, tabs, carousels, and slideshows. And in Chapter 17, we look at this from more of a mobile perspective, where we talk about jQuery mobile. All right. Now, I do want to say that I think that this section is a little bit mislabeled to say that JavaScript and jQuery for the non-programmer, because definitely the stuff that they show in here is programmatic. I also do want to mention, and I may have said this before, I don't know, but if I come into here and I go out to Muroc.com, if you're a full-time student in the BTC IT Web Software Developer Program, you're supposed to be taking this class in conjunction with the 152-119 Learning to Program with JavaScript class. And in that class, we're also using a Muroc book in there, and it's Muroc's JavaScript book. So the reason I'm telling you that is if I take a quick gander here at the table of contents, it starts JavaScript as though the person going through this has little to no knowledge of even programming. So there's a fast start with JavaScript where we go over a bunch of the, basically use it as more of a programming language. Some JavaScript essentials, and then the advanced JavaScript skills. So the point is, if you are a full-time student in the BTC IT Web Software Developer Program, by the time we get to these chapters in our Muroc's HTML5 and CSS3 3rd edition text, students should already be pretty well versed in JavaScript. All right, so let's take a look at what's in here. Given an HTML document, use JavaScript to enhance the page so that it includes the current date or year or a print button or all of them. Given an HTML document, use jQuery to enhance the page so it includes an image rollover, an image swap, or a slideshow. Use the internet to find JavaScript and jQuery code that you can use for other functions. In other words, there's a boatload of code already out there. Describe how JavaScript works. Well, that's pretty generic. Describe 3 ways that JavaScript can be used in an HTML document. Describe the DOM, the document object model, and explain what happens when DOM scripting is used to change the DOM. In general terms, describe how you script the DOM and how the $sign is commonly used for DOM scripting. Describe the way that JavaScript event handlers work with DOM scripting. Describe jQuery and the 2 ways you can include it in a web page. Describe the syntax for calling jQuery methods, including the use of the $sign, selectors, and the dot operator. Describe the syntax for coding a jQuery event handler, including the use of an event method and function. Describe the use of the jQuery ready method, and in general terms, describe how you would use jQuery for functions like image rollovers, etc. And again, one last time, I just want to mention this. Not only is there this Muroc book, and I have no idea what book is going to be used for the spring of 2017 right now, but Muroc has a jQuery book also. And that book goes over in depth all of the different stuff that's talked about in here. So what I'm trying to get across to you is this particular chapter, for lack of better words, is kind of a primer to get you used to working with this stuff, to get you on the way with working with this stuff. All right, now this slide was given back in like Chapter 2 or Chapter 3 or something like that, how JavaScript fits into the jQuery architecture. But let me just say one thing before this. This chapter talks about JavaScript and it talks about jQuery. So if you imagine that JavaScript, if you imagine it, forgetting about computers for a minute, if you look at JavaScript and you kind of equate it to a public library, all right, you with me? So it's just a library full of books. Then jQuery would be a section of that library that was dedicated to a certain topic. In other words, what I'm trying to say is jQuery is JavaScript, but it's a JavaScript library. It's a bunch of JavaScript code that was written to make it easier to add JavaScript to web pages. So in this diagram that you see here, and it's also on page 499 in the book, you can see that JavaScript code is executed in the web browser. Web browser has a built-in JavaScript engine. When something is actually executed in the browser, as this is, it's referred to client-side processing. The stuff that we've talked about in the past has by and large been server-side processing because it's done on the web server. Well, what client-side processing does for you, among other things, all right, among other things, is it does a little bit of offloading from the server. So it takes some of the processing burden off of the server. That should make your application run faster. Virtually all web browsers today have embedded or have enabled JavaScript applications to run on them. All right, let's take a look at this example that's right here. So I'm going to grab everything that's here, done this before, and I'm going to build a very, very, extremely very simple web page for you. I'm not going to worry here about all of the meta tags and all the other stuff that we really should be putting in. All right, drop that in. I'm going to space it out a little bit so, at least in my opinion, it's going to look a little nicer. All right, so we have 2 paragraphs in here, and in each one of these paragraphs we've added script tags. In English, what that means is we want to run JavaScript right within these script tags. So the first thing that we're doing is this is literally referred to as creating a JavaScript date object. The name of the object is today. The type of the object is date. What we're actually doing there, if you've never heard this terminology before, is we are creating, or as it's more often known, instantiating a date object. So date is the name of a class. We're making an object of that class, just as Jeff is an object of a person class. Today is an object of a date class. When you create variables in JavaScript, the recommendation is you use the word var, which is short for variable. Also, since we're taking JavaScript and we're putting it right inside of our document, all right, since we're doing that and putting it right inside of our document, like this, okay, we need what are called script tags. Beginning script tag, ending script tag. Beginning script tag, ending script tag. These script tags are within beginning and ending paragraph tags. Beginning and ending paragraph tags. So we're creating a new date object here. Then document.write literally means write on the screen, current date, and then after that it should write the current date. Then in here we're creating another date object where we're re-instancing it as a new one, and we're putting in here copy, which is going to be copyright, but all we're grabbing is the year. So where this should say something like 6/5/2016, this should just say 2016. Let's see if indeed that happens. So I'm going to save this. I don't want to go out to Chapter 2 now. Instead, I want to make a new folder in here. Come on. New folder that we're going to call Chapter 3. And in Chapter 3, this will be our index.html file. All right. Now, there's no HTML in here, so we're not worrying about it being pretty or whatever. We just want it to be functional. So there you go. Current date. This is just the format of it. June 5th, 2016. That ampersand asked for just the year, and we got that. Just so you can see what's happening. All right. Again, don't think that you're going to look at this chapter and become an expert in JavaScript. I certainly don't consider myself to be an expert in JavaScript. I'm always learning things. There used to be a really nice website out there, and I don't know why, but for some reason they brought it down. But you may want to look occasionally to see if it comes back up, called hunlock.com. So you could not, so they never brought the site back up. But there are a lot of very nice sites. I'm going to type in here Mozilla JavaScript. So if you go out to here, and I will add this to my list. Hopefully I still have that open. JavaScript. I will just call it JavaScript site. It's not a good name, but I just want you to see this. This is https://developer.mozilla.org/en-us/docs/web/javascript. That's a mouthful. But when you look over here, they have tutorials. So here's a JavaScript guide, an overview, object-oriented JavaScript, a reintroduction to JavaScript. There's beginning stuff, there's advanced stuff. There are plenty of sites out there, and I also gave you the W3 School site. But this is very nice. I also want to mention one more thing about JavaScript that tends to confuse people. All right? When we talk about the big three in web development, so when you talk about the big three, and let's just put them up here, kind of as they are, but I'm going to make this a lot bigger. So if we talk about HTML, whether it's HTML5 or not, when we talk about CSS and whether it's CSS3 or not, and we talk about JavaScript, all right, pretty much HTML5 is under the control of the World Wide Web Consortium. Which is the W3C. All right? And hopefully it's not a surprise to you that when we look, so is CSS. Same thing. But what you may or may not know is that when it comes to JavaScript, they're under the purview or under the control of the European computer manufacturers. And I believe the A in there is association. I think I'm giving you the right name for that. The ECMA. Now that surprises a lot of people. The JavaScript is under the control of something out in Europe. The W3C, the World Wide Web Consortium, still has some control over it. But you sometimes hear of JavaScript being called ECMA JavaScript. So if you ever do, that's what it is. All right, you saw this. That is the same thing that I gave you the results of when I ran it. So that and the slide right here are the same thing. All right. The two attributes of the script element. Well, let's look at them in code. Okay. There's the script. Okay. And the other one is not shown in here. You might look at that and go, well, why? There's another thing, one that says source and one that says type. Okay. Well, let's talk about another way this could have been written. Could have been written. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take all of this code that you see in here and I'm going to pull it out. All these script tags and everything else. It's going to look a little weird for a second. And I'm going to save this as something else. So I've got two copies. So I'm going to grab all of this, pull it out, create a new document. I'm going to put this in there, but I don't need the script tags now. But I'll tell you what I do want to do is I want to tab that over. You'll see why I'm doing what I'm doing in just a second. All right, now I'm going to grab the other stuff that was in here. And I'm going to pull that out as well. I'm not going to need these paragraph tags anymore. You're going to see all of this in just a second. Please bear with me if you would. So I'm going to grab that, and again, I'm going to copy that stuff in there. So I've got another var today. All right. What I'm doing is I'm taking my JavaScript and I'm putting it into an external file. And I'm going to call this in here, I'm going to call this function. And I can call this whatever I want, but I'm going to call it date01. All right, so there's, oops, and I want that curly brace to be there. Then I'm going to call this function date02. Again, put in my curly braces. All right. So why am I doing this? Well, what I'm doing is I'm segregating out or putting the JavaScript in its own file. And I'm going to call this file, all right, I'm going to call this file date.js because JavaScript files should always end with an extension of JS. All right. Now I'm going to go back to this file, and remember I had those two paragraphs. I guess I should have left those paragraphs in. All right. And what I want to do is I want to call those functions now. Now I'm going to do this, I'm going to run it, it's not going to work. So don't let that worry you. Date01. And down here I'm going to call date02. Nothing should happen other than I might get an error, and it's okay. All right, so I'm now going to save this file, save as, and instead of index.html, I'm going to call this index2.html. All right, now I'm going to run this. And notice what I get. Date01, what is that? Well, the system did not know, it did not know how to handle this stuff. All right? So what happened was, it literally just thought that was text. All right? Because it didn't know where to look for this stuff. So I've got to tell it where to look for it. So I have to put it up here, I have to put a script tag in. And I can say this, but I really don't have to. I can say type equals JavaScript. You used to have to put that in, but now that's the default. And I have to say source equals, and then the name of my file, which was date.js. All right? It's getting better, but it still is probably going to print out the same thing that we saw before. So let's see if I'm right. Now it prints out nothing. Okay? So because it doesn't quite know how to handle what I just did. So what I think I have to do here, and let's see if this works or not, script. Now we're going to tell it literally call that. So now let's see what happens. Still didn't like it. Trying to figure out what I'm doing here that it doesn't like. Tell you the way that I would have written this, probably should have written it, is like this. I'm going to have one function in here. I'm just going to call it main. Many programming languages have a function called main. All right, and main is kind of a point of entry, for lack of better words. So I'm going to have today 1, and then I'm going to get rid of this, and this will be today 2. All right, so now I've got my function main. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to save this, and rather than being in a paragraph or whatever, like we have right here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell the system that as soon as my web page loads, so on load, so as soon as the web page loads, equals main. So I'm telling it to call that main function as soon as my page loads. Then I don't need anything in here. I get rid of all that stuff. All right? So let's see if that works. And if it doesn't, I'm a little perplexed. It's not. Good golly. Head, doc type, head, body, HTML. I don't have a beginning HTML tag in here. So now, let's try to run it and see what happens. Still got nothing. Since we don't really need this in here anymore, I'm just going to put in source equals date.js. Did I save my date file after? Yes, I did. All right. Did I call it main? Yes, I did. But it's not printing out anything, and I'm trying to figure out for the life of me why. What this is saying is once this loads, okay. All right, let's try to put a button in here and we'll do it that way. So we'll put a button here. All right, so I'll say input type equal button on click equals main. Value equal run program. All right, let's look at that. If I typed it in syntactically correct, I'm not getting anything. This is just not good right here. But as the saying goes, you know, I can look at this as being a cluster, or I can look at this as being an opportunity, and that's what I'm trying to do here. All right, input. Type equal button, that looks okay. On click equal main, that should be okay. Value equal run program. Looking in there for something that looks incorrect. It's like, since I'm not getting anything, it's as though I'm missing something in here. So doc type HTML, head, title. Oh, I never put in an ending script tag. Oh my goodness. Now let's try to run it. There's run program. There's my current date and my other stuff. Probably would have ran from the beginning, but I didn't have that ending script tag in there. Let's come in here, and after we're running all that stuff, so we put in today, date, etc. Let's say plus, and I think in here I'm going to need a backslash n. It might be a BR tag, I don't remember. try a BR tag. In fact, let's put 2 of them in. All right, now we have the same output that we had before. So, again, I have a tendency to laugh at myself, and you might say, well, geez, you should know this stuff, Jeff. I do know it, all right? May have forgotten a few things, but I know it. So let's take a look at the first one we did, and then the second one that we did, okay? So we don't need that town hall anymore. Save the file, sure. We don't need this one. We don't need this one. No. Or that one. Or that one. But I do want to bring up, so I'm going to open the original index file. All right. Now, I should be able to take my index 2, which is the other one, right mouse click on here, and choose what I want to do is I want to open up both of these files together. And I want you to be able to see them side by side. That's my goal here. All right. And I've forgotten how to do it, so I'm going to look it up. View, go to another view, is that it? There we go. All right, so they're not the same size, but at least hopefully you get the idea here as far as what's going on. Let's see if I can make that bigger. Yeah, it's not letting me. Can I shrink that one down? It's fine. So here's the first one we had, and here's the second one. In this first example, we did some stuff in here that's considered bad practice. In fact, I'm going to put more stuff in here that's considered bad practice. So I'm going to come in here, and I'm going to add a style tag, and an ending style tag. And all I'm going to say here is background, and I'm going to make this gray. Okay? All right, so now in this file on the left, the one that's in the bigger text, what you see is I have in the same file mixed HTML, all right, along with JavaScript, along with, HTML, and here's examples of HTML, along with CSS, along with JavaScript. In this example, I've got just HTML in here, and I've got a call out to JavaScript. And what I'll also put in here is I'll say link rel equals style sheet href equals, and we'll just call this ch3.css. And I'll have to make that file in a minute. All right, so I'm going to grab that line of code, and that's it. But the point is, in the example on the right, I've separated out. So I will have my HTML in one file, my JavaScript in another file, and my CSS in another file. That's called separations of concerns. That's also writing your code unobtrusively. All right, you'll hear that term, because this is obtrusive. This means that I'm combining together all of my stuff, and I don't want to do that. All right, so what I do want to do here is I want to add another file. So I'm going to say File, new, and I'm going to add in here that background gray. And I have to tell it where and what do I want the background gray to be. So I'm going to come in here and say that basically it's the body that I want to have a gray background. Now I've screwed up my font size. I have to fix that. And I'm going to save this as ch03.css. I think that's what I said it was supposed to be called. All right. So there's the script tag ch03.css. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up my original index file. There it is. That's the one that had everything together, and I'm going to run that. So there's no mistaking here as far as what's going on. And I'll close this. So everything's closed. So I'm going to run the original index.html right here. And there's my output. All right. Now I'm going to come in and I'm going to run the other one, the index2. All right. I've got to run program, but then notice how it looks. So here's the one example, and there's the other example. And as you can see, they're identical to one another. All right. The output is identical between the two. Right? The only difference in there, again, and the reason this wasn't gray is I have to tell it what I want to have a background of gray. That should have been body. Background gray. So now when I run this, it'll have a gray background. There we go. Okay. And the reason that this one, the other one, doesn't have a gray background is I'm calling it from the JavaScript. But it does a good job in that it really shows us the difference. Okay, but the output, the way the text looks, is the same. Now, that was a lot of time spent, and maybe in your mind, okay, what I did there was I wasted your time, which definitely was not my intention. All right, I've got to come back in here though, in settings, preferences, editing maybe, I don't know, new document, new history, file association, etc. Somewhere in here they've got a font setting. I've got to find it because now I made the font too small. Something in here is going to allow me to reset this. There's a fast way to do it, but for whatever reason, it's not working on my machine here. I'm trying to do stuff in the background. So I'm going to try to fix that. What I'm going to do is, for just a second, I'm going to pause this presentation, and then I'll come back to it. Okay? All right, I think I found it. This is way too small. But if I go under settings, style configurator, there my font size is 10. I'm going to change it to 14. Tell it to save and close. Of course, that didn't work. Lovely. Settings, style configurator. It says it's got it here. Styles, global font, enable global font size. There we go. See how it got bigger. Save and close. All right. So that's much easier to read. All right, I'm going to jump back then into the slides, but I wanted to show that to you. I thought at least that was important enough to show you. All right, so let's go back and see if we can get into run mode in here for at least a bit. So I just showed you this. You say script source equal, and you put in your file, and it's got to have a .js extension. It's got to be within script tags, and then you need an ending script tag. And mine originally didn't work because I didn't have an ending script tag. Here's actually embedding JavaScript into a program. Now, if you look at that, you might be very overwhelmed. There's a $sign in there and some other stuff. It's all stuff that we'll go over in here, but we'll go over in much greater depth and breadth of coverage in the 152.119 JavaScript class. So again, don't get too confused. I want to make sure that I restarted my tape. And we have. Good. You can embed JavaScript in the head section near the top, in the body section. It's even possible if you wanted to, you could do it in a footer. All right. So it says here the code for a web page. Don't let the stuff that's in here throw you. There's all sorts of stuff in here we have not, or we've gone over in other classes, but I'm doing these lectures out of order. All right. So again, you should be very expert in this stuff. You should be able to actually read all of this by the time you see this lecture, and it should make total sense to you. All right, here's the document object model. Now, when I had earlier told you about all of the different W3 Schools things that were out there, if I type in W3 Schools DOM tutorial, what you'll notice is there's one of those also. There's a JavaScript HTML DOM, there's an XML DOM tutorial, there's an HTML DOM. For now, I'm going to go to the, let's look at the JavaScript and DOM reference. Alright, there's a bunch of stuff out there. Let's go back and let's find the JavaScript HTML DOM. That should probably work well for now. Alright, and I'm going to save that, and I'm going to save it under, make this a little smaller, JavaScript DOM tutorial. Alright. I'm getting a nice collection of URLs that you'll be able to use. What I want to tell you, and I'm not going to go off that tutorial at all, but what I want to tell you is when you create a web page, what gets created for you is something that's referred to as a document object model, or a DOM. So, in other words, this page that you see right here becomes something that looks like this. At the top, you can see you've got HTML. The HTML, that's called the HTML node, N-O-D-E. The HTML node has two child nodes, one called head, one called body. The head node has one child node called title, and that has a text node child. The body has two child nodes right under it, an H1 node and a form node. The H1 node has a text node under it. The form node under it has a label node, an input node, and a span node. The label node and the span node each have text nodes under them. So again, this is kind of a visual interpretation of what's going on here. Now, do you have to worry about that? Well, the more you understand the document object model, the more you're going to be able to go in and on your own, the more you're going to be able to take any web page and, for lack of better words, kind of do whatever you want to do with it and be as granular with it as you want to. So these DOM nodes, as it says, the ones you usually use in scripting are what are referred to as the element node, the ATTR node, and the text node. Alright, I'm trying to go back in the book where we were. So I'm up to page 503 in the book. The element is an element in a web page. It can have as a child node. So under an element node, you can have another element node, or a text node, or a comment node. The ATTR node is an attribute of an element. Remember earlier when we said stuff like, in fact, in our JavaScript file, when we said source equal, and then we had in double quotes, we had like date.js. That source, that src, that's an attribute of the script tag. So an ATTR is an attribute of an element. And it can have a text node as a child node. Finally, there's text. A text node can't have a child. It's just text. So the DOM, the document object model, is a hierarchical collection of nodes. The DOM for a web page is built as the web page is loaded by the web browser. When you use JavaScript to modify the DOM, you're doing what's called scripting the DOM, or just DOM scripting. And DOM scripting is an unbelievably powerful capability, because when the DOM is changed, the underlying web page changes as well. So how do we do this? Well, one of the most powerful things that you can use in regular JavaScript is something that's called getElementById, which gets the corresponding HTML element that has the ID that's passed to it, and it returns that. Now, please note the spelling and the capitalization. The E in element, the B in by, and the I in ID are uppercase, and everything else is lowercase. Okay, if you want to be able to write something out, you use the right statement. But, going back for a second, anything, and I mean anything in here, so this title, this H1 tag, this form tag, this label tag, this input, this span, any of the stuff that's in here that I add an ID for, and you can see we only have an ID here, and we have one here, and we have one here, just in those three elements. All three of those elements now, you can use the getElementById on any of those. All right. What you find is most JavaScript developers put an ID on virtually everything that they may want to work with programmatically. Well, using this getElementById is kind of a pain, because you have to say, you have to do this. Let's see. Okay, you have to do like document.getElementById and then whatever it is you're looking for. And it's not that it's that difficult, but it's a lot of typing. So what most people do, and this is shown on the middle of page 505, is they create a shortcut. All right? If you look at this, you might be confused, but in English what it's saying is, anytime I use the $sign and I put something after it in parentheses, treat it as though I typed in document.getElementById with that same thing in parentheses. All right, so it's a standard function that gets the object for an element by using its ID. Now, there's a lot of different DOM properties that you can use. 3 of them are shown down toward the bottom of page 505. The first one is the value property, which typically, as it says, for something like a text box, it will either get or set the value of an element. Well, what's the difference? If it's on the left-hand side of an equal sign, it's setting the value. If it's on the right-hand side of an equal sign, it's getting the value. You also have first child shown here, which returns a node object for the first child node of an element, and node value. And for either a text, comment, or attribute node, it gets or sets, again, depending on whether or not it's on the left-hand or right-hand side of an equal sign, the text that's stored in a node. So the document object that we saw here, right there, that's the object that lets you work with the document object model. When you script the DOM, you typically use the $sign as a shortcut so that you don't have to constantly be typing in document.getElementById. And those properties that we just saw, those are just some of the many properties that are available to you. All right? Now this is a lot of stuff to throw at you. This is pretty darn heavy. So if you're in this class, but you're not in the 152, 119 class, there's a lot of stuff to absorb here. And I do understand that. All right? But I do want to mention again, if I go out here and just so you know, we looked at some of this stuff. I gave you some. But how about if we just type in here, DOM, not tutorial, but DOM properties. All right? And I can go back here, for example, to W3 schools. And there's the DOM method. So that's how we work with properties. But here, JavaScript kit, DOM element properties. I don't know if this is good or not good or whatever. But it shows you in here. That's nice. Because it shows you the major properties and it gives you examples, at least with some of them. So let's grab that and we'll add that to our list of URLs. DOM properties. Okay? There is not one universal resource either for looking at this stuff. There are so many different things out there that are so good, and as you probably guessed, many of them are repetitive. All right. All right, so here we've got, it says here, 3 properties for scripting the DOM. I think we looked at this already. Okay, I believe we looked at these. Yes, we did. Okay. So here's an example, and again, I do want to say this one more time because I want you to understand it, and that is this. Whoops, I don't want to do that. That's what I want. Forget sometimes that I'm in the mode that I'm in PowerPoint here. So what I want you to understand is, grab all this stuff and just move it up here a little bit. This right here, that line that you see, is the same thing as saying var email address equals document dot get element by ID email address. So what you see here is hopefully one of the reasons that you might want to use, all right, one of the reasons that you might want to use some of this shortcuts, because it is less typing. So we say this dot value. So we say this right here instead of this down here. But they both are valid. This can only work, this one, if you've already set that alias up that we looked at just a couple minutes ago. But it's less typing. All right, that's what I want you to kind of get across to you. So here's how to get something, because you're taking on the right-hand side of an equal sign and assigning it there. Here is how to set something, because it's on the left-hand side of an equal sign. All right. They talk about printing, and it says a page that uses a JavaScript button for printing. Okay. Well, when you click a button, what's happening as far as JavaScript is concerned is you're initiating an event. Actually, what's called a button click event. So an event occurs when an action like clicking on a button or loading a page or whatever occurs. Then the JavaScript code can respond to the event with what's called an event handler. All right? So we can do something that looks like this. So the idea is, if you create an application that's what's called a GUI, or graphical user interface application, with buttons and boxes and a bunch of other stuff on it, you can make your program react to when you do certain things in those buttons and boxes, etc. When you do those things, they're called events. The code that you write to handle those are called event handlers. So again, an event occurs when the user performs an action like clicking on an HTML element. The JavaScript code that handles the event is known as an event handler. The event handler can script the DOM or it can do other things. Okay. So next they have an example here. Oh, here's the DOM lifecycle. Okay. Good enough picture. It's shown on 507 in the book. So the page is loaded. Okay, as you see, some kind of an event occurs, which causes some kind of a script to execute, which modifies the DOM in some way, which updates the web page. And after it's loaded, then it just comes back and it waits for another event. So you can imagine this code, for lack of better words, is just sitting here waiting for something to happen. That's what it's doing, literally. All right? And while it's waiting, it's, for lack of better words, it's doing almost nothing. So here's some terms you should be familiar with. The JavaScript engine, and that's basically what's going to run your JavaScript, and it's in the browser. The document object model, which we talked about. The DOM, which is made up of nodes. The code that you put in to get an element or do whatever. That's DOM scripting. What you're actually working on is the document object, and we just looked a little bit at what an event is and what an event handler is. So this example that they put in here, and what I'm going to do is just grab their code, and I'm going to go through it with you. The code is on page 509 in the book, and that's the HTML code is there. And then the JavaScript is going to be on page 511. Now, you may or may not understand this code as we go through it, and that's not really that big a thing. But I'm literally going to grab this that you see right here. Whoops, why I keep doing that. But I want to grab everything that's here, and I'm going to just build this by copy and paste. Okay. So that's all of that. Create a new document and just put it in there. All right. And then I'm going to grab the next page. So this is all of the HTML. So that's all the HTML, whoops, that's on that page. And then this is the rest of it. Okay. So by putting in all of that HTML that you see right there, all right, by putting in all of that HTML, which is, I want to put that right there, and this particular example is an email list example. So I'm literally going to call this, and I'll put it under my Chapter 3 stuff. There's Chapter 2, there's Chapter 3. And I'm going to call this email list.html. Okay, there it is. Now I'm going to run this. There's no JavaScript associated with it yet, but I just want to make sure I copied the stuff in okay. Now it doesn't look pretty like it does in the book because I also didn't copy in the CSS file, so we'll do that later. All right, so we've got that. Now let's go in and so this is the way we want it to look, but we want to put in this JavaScript code that you see here and here. Okay? So we also are going to need to add this line of code here. This is going to be our script line. Okay, so I can add that to this file. I don't have email list.css yet. Oh, we already have that line here. Okay, so now we've got to create that file. And that file is shown down here and on the next page. So I'm going to grab this, copy it to the clipboard, paste it in. All right. All I'm doing is just literally typing in or copying in the code that is in the book. right, and I've got a copy of this code. Again, I know I sound like a broken record when I say this, but this is not going to make a lot of sense if you don't take the time to go and read the book. All right, so I want to save this as email list.js. All right, so I now have my JavaScript. So the only thing that I still need is the CSS file. And I think I'm going to have to literally grab that from online. So I want to pretty it up so mine looks nice like the one in the book looks. So let's see. Source code, I'm in book apps, and I'm in chapter 15. And this is the email list in JavaScript, and there's the email list.css file. So I want to copy that, and I want to copy that out to here. Paste that in. So now I have my email list file. So let's see if we made this look any different. Okay, I think it looks a lot nicer now. So when I click this, notice what I get. This field is required, etc. So let's take a look at the code that's in your book on pages 509, 511, and see if we can figure out what's going on here. All right, so we'll start with the HTML. So here's our typical beginning HTML stuff. There's our title. We're linking in our style sheet. We're linking in our JavaScript file. All right, so we're writing in here. We're attempting at least to write good. HTML5, so we've got a main here. So everything that we're doing there in our whole thing is in between a main. Okay, we've got an H1 tag that just says, please join our email list. That H1 tag is this one right here. So nothing major there. Then we've got a form that begins here and it ends down here. All right. When we click the button, it's supposed to go to join.html. Well, I don't want it to go to join.html because I don't have that written. I want it, I guess, to go to email list. I want it to go right back to itself. So email list.html. I want it to stay right where it is. So we've got a label in there that says email address and then a text box for the email address. So that is this stuff that you see here. Forgetting about that this field is thing. Then we've got another one that says re-enter and another one for first name, and then we've got our button. So that's exactly what we're building right here. All right? Okay, so we want to make sure that file is brought in, our JavaScript file. So what's in that file? Well, the first thing that you see at the top of the file is we're setting up that alias that we talked about before. Again, I don't like the way the author does this. Let me show it the way I do it. So I'm going to put a little bit more white space in here because I think it's much easier to read. Again, you may or may not agree with what I'm doing right here. Ideally, once we look at this, you'll start to think, wow, this kind of just makes sense, because it does. It's very logical, and in fact, good programming is done in a very logical way. All right, so we're setting up our, right here, we are going to be setting up our document.getElement by ID alias. So that's all we're doing right there. All right. So here, this is what this is the function that's called when the HTML form button is clicked. Okay? So it's called join list, and we're writing a function here which says grab the value that we put in to that first text box for the email. So that's saying grab this value, and then the next line right here is saying go in and grab this value, and then the next line is doing something else. So this is so these two lines, this is going to grab the value in first text box and put it in a local JavaScript variable. All right, that should make sense. Hopefully it makes sense. The next one is going to grab the value in the second text box and put it into a JavaScript variable. All right, then we're coming down here and we're creating a Boolean variable. Remember, a Boolean variable is true, false. So we're assuming that this is going to be true. All right, so this next line here, check if first email address text box was left blank. So if it was, we wanted to say this field is required. You already saw that. Since we didn't put anything in there, it's not valid anymore, so we're setting is valid to false. Otherwise, there's something in that email address. All right? Otherwise, so we're saying with this error field, set it equal to nothing. Nothing at all. Then come in, so check if the email was blank. Here, all this means is something was entered into the first text box. We're not right now validating that it's a valid email or it's validly formatted. It just was something put in there. All right, here, verify that the contents of text box 1 are boy, oh boy, my mouse just keeps sticking here. The same as the contents of text box 2. So if they're not the same, again, you say that they must be equal. So if this is the case, the contents match. All right. Then we come down here and we check to see, was there anything in the first name? Check if first name text box is blank, and as you can see, if it is, put an error in there. Otherwise, there's a value in the first name text box. That's not text box. All right. Then finally down at the bottom here, what we're saying is if there were no errors, submit the form. Okay? And finally, this last thing that you see down here that might look a little different, this says set a link, I'll put link in double quotes, between clicking the button and calling the join list function. All right, so I just put a bunch of stuff in there. Let's go back and run this, and let's run it correctly. What I mean is this. I'm going to come in here, email address, jscott@blackhawk.edu. Whoops. I don't know what happened there, but I hit a wrong button. All right, jscott@blackhawk.edu. Boom. Re-enter, jscott@blackhawk.edu. I'm going to leave the first name blank. Notice this field is required, but I didn't get any errors here. All right, now I'm going to leave this field blank. This field is required. The entry must equal the first entry. So now I'm going to put this back in here. But I'm going to grab this, and I'm going to make sure that it says something different. And Jeff. This entry must equal the first entry. So now I'm going to make it so everything is legit. So I've got an email address. I re-entered it exactly the same, and I put in a first name. Now, what it's telling me is it sent all this stuff up. This is called a query string, remember, and it sent that information. So it all worked. That was maybe quick, maybe not quick, I don't know. But what I want to do is I want to stop right here. Okay, so stop that. Try to bring that back up. Come on, it's not coming back up. All right. Restore. But with where I am right now, I don't know what is wrong with this, but I'll get that fixed. All right. With where I am right now, what I want to do is I want to stop right here. There's my chapter 15. Okay. What the heck is going on here is way over my pay grade. So all right, but I want to stop right here before I go on because this tape is getting too long. I am now on page 512. It's a natural place to stop because we're going to talk about jQuery. So we're going to do that. Stop this right now.